Good morning. I'm back. Did you miss me? Oh, thank you. So as you know, we've been doing a series on the parables for the last 6 weeks or so, and Joe started off our unit within a unit on the parables last week, our parables about the future, parables of hope. And these parables tell us a little bit about what's going to happen at the end of time, and then knowing that, how we should act and live in the present time, here in Saskatoon, 2013. Now, when Jesus came, he made the world of God, the world of heaven, available to us in a completely new way. You see, when God created the world, his world and our world were one. We had a perfect connection to God. We had perfect relationships with one another. Creation was healthy and flourishing. We had deep and meaningful lives. And then came sin. And with the entry of sin, that bond between us and God, between heaven and earth, it was shattered. It was broken. And what God has been up to since that time is to repair this broken relationship, to reestablish this relationship between heaven and earth, to connect these two worlds again. And Jesus, in the flesh, dying and living again, was his best work. When Jesus came, he dealt with this brokenness completely. But while he dealt with it completely, the reality of that has yet to come to bear on earth here. One day, Jesus promises that he's going to come back and he's going to bring those two worlds completely back together again, and everything is going to be redeemed, and those relationships will be reestablished, creation will be healthy, everything will be new again. And in the meantime, he has left us some clues about what's going to happen then so that we can live well now. And one of those clues is the parable of the net. And this is what it says. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. And when it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw the bad out. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the background to this parable. We find this story right in the middle of the book of Matthew, the first book in the New Testament. And this book, Matthew, focuses especially on the relationship between Jesus and the Jewish people, and how the Jewish people rejected Jesus eventually as the Messiah. And specifically, this book focuses on the relationship between Jesus and the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees. In fact, as the book progresses, the tension between these two groups of people increases and increases and increases until eventually something's got to give and Jesus is put to death. Now, what is most vexing to Jesus about how the Pharisees act is the way that they treat the regular people, the regular old Joes. And Matthew shows us the hostility between Jesus and the religious leaders through these little pictures throughout the book of Matthew. For instance, Jesus heals the sick and throws out demons, and the Pharisees question him for working on the Sabbath or accuse him of being in league with Satan. He forgives people of their sins, and the Pharisees say he's claiming authority he has no right to claim. You see, when the Pharisees imagined the Messiah, the Savior, coming back, they believed that they were going to be the in crowd, that the Messiah would treat them as special and would follow the rules right along with them. But instead, Jesus, who claims to be this Messiah, comes and associates with the lowly, the outcast. And this challenges the very core of the beliefs of the religious leaders. Jesus' heart was with the ones on the outside. It says in Matthew chapter 9, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, for they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. When I finished high school, I went to a pretty conservative Bible college, and I was a good kid. I wanted to do the right thing. I didn't want to break the rules. I didn't want to create a stir. But there were so many rules at that time, at that school, that I couldn't keep them. And in fact, I ended up getting work duty one time because I broke a rule I didn't even know existed. Harassed and helpless. My friend told me a little while ago about training for the Peace Corps when she was about the same age as I was, about 18. And when she was undergoing inspection, one of the superiors who, after they had polished their boots, would send the cadets out into a muddy field before inspection so that they would fail every time. Harassed and helpless. And it was the same with the Pharisees. They kicked the door to the kingdom shut so that nobody could get in except for who they deemed good enough, who they chose. And so the people that they were meant to care for were like sheep without a shepherd. And so Jesus, through the book of Matthew, continues to press his case to bring the kingdom, to challenge the culture of the dominant religious leaders. We think of Jesus as a peacemaker, but here in Matthew, he continues to knowingly, purposefully get under the skin of these powerful leaders. And the group of parables that we find in Matthew 13 falls right in the middle of this tension. Let's read it again with this in mind. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. And when it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets and threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So first of all, the net. Let's talk about the net. Now, the word for net in this parable, it doesn't occur at any other point in the Bible. It only occurs here. And the word is sen, which translated means a dragnet. And this is what a dragnet looks like. That's me and Joe. We took a day off this week. We went fishing. I like those shorts. Hey, I look good in those shorts. If you look at this net, you can see that the way it works is not like a fisherman standing on the shore reeling in the fish. It catches everything in its path. A drag net catches all the fish, but it doesn't just catch the fish. It catches the old boots, the worn-out tires, the bits of garbage, the algae, everything that's in the water right down to the bottom. In fact, I saw some pictures of drag nets that were drawn between two huge fishing boats and would cover a really great deal of water. A drag net is indiscriminate. It doesn't choose what it catches. It takes up everything in its path. And Jesus says this is what the kingdom is like. It is like this indiscriminate dragnet. It catches everything. We often think of the kingdom as only having to do with souls, with spiritual health. But this parable shows us with this picture is that the kingdom doesn't just have to do with souls. It has to do with everything. It has to do with all of it. Redemption isn't just something that happens in our hearts. It is something that happens to all of creation. The kingdom is indiscriminate. It isn't choosy. It wraps itself around all of it, working out redemption and renewal in every little bit of creation. Nothing is safe from it. It's all caught up. It's all a part of it. Wherever you are, there you will find the kingdom. This whole messy thing that we call the world, all of it is caught up in the net. This is our Father's world. Now, this net is also full. The parable says that when this net is full, it will be drawn up onto the shore, which means that we're headed somewhere. Life is not one endless loop of dying and beginning again. One day, at the fullness of time, this space and time itself will end. The story of history will finish. In fact, this word full in Greek doesn't just mean like a bursting at the seams net. It can also mean to finish, to accomplish, to fulfill, to perfect. And so it also carries with it this connotation of a full period of time. Jesus will fulfill what he started here, what he started with his life and death on earth. He will fulfill that work of redemption on that day. when the net is pulled up onto shore. I have this saying that I pin on certain things that happen in my life, things that I know I'll never really understand or I don't know the answer to, and I just suspect there's more to them. I call them a heaven problem. There are some things in life we will never figure out, we will never know until the time is filled up and Jesus brings an end to history. Things like, who really shot JFK? Like, the CIA was totally behind that, I know it. Where the remote went to my first stereo, that bugs me all the time. And last week, my favorite tank top went missing. I have no idea where it is. That's a heaven problem. But there are more serious things that are dealt with in these heaven problems too, at the fullness of time. Things like, why did my loved one die? Why do people do these horrific things to one another? Why didn't he love me? Why didn't I get that job? These are all things that are heaven problems. Things that might not ever make sense to us in this period of time, not until the day history ends and we find ourselves dragged up onto shore with the other fish in that full net. And when the time is full, all of those holes, those empty spaces with no answers, the kingdom's going to enter them and fill them up, and all will make sense. Like a pitcher full of rocks, and then you pour the water in, the kingdom is going to fill up all the spaces. Now, there's going to be a sorting when this happens. There's going to be a judgment. When the fullness of time is reached, this parable makes it clear that there will be sorting. It says, they drew the net ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The angels will separate the evil from the righteous. They will throw the good fish into baskets. They will throw the bad away. There will be a reckoning. And I don't know about you, but the first thing I think is, how can I be a good fish? What do I need to avoid the weeping, the gnashing of teeth? They're really hard words to hear, aren't they? Well, let's go back to the dragnet and to the context of the parables, Jesus' fight with the Pharisees. First, the kingdom is like the dragnet. It gathers up everything in its path. The kingdom is about all of God's creation. It's about the redemption of all things. In John 3, Jesus says this. He says, God so loved the world that he sent me, so that everyone who believes in me, in my life and death, will not perish, but have a full and everlasting life. God didn't send me into the world to condemn it, but to save it. The kingdom is not about condemning. It is about saving. It is about redemption. It is about renewal. It is about new life. So then, what about this judging part? Well, two things need to be said. First, it says that it's the angels who do the sorting. And the angels do the will of God the Father and Jesus the Son. And so the judging is only done by God the Father or Jesus the Son. And when is this judging done? It's not done today. It's not done yesterday. It is done at the fullness of time, when the fishing net is pulled on the shore, when the kingdom enters all of those empty spaces, when we know things that we don't know now. So the judging is not done by us, and it is not done today. It is done by God at the end of time. See, there's this delay. There is a waiting in the kingdom, this act of patient waiting for the end of time, for this fullness of time. It's called forbearance. When we forbear, we refrain from making judgments and acting hastily in the moment. We trust that when we get to heaven, our heaven problems will be fixed by the guy who's in charge of that sort of thing. And in the meantime, the kingdom acts like a dragnet. It gathers it all in. It collects it all. When Jesus died, he didn't die for only some of us or for only some of our problems. He didn't die for only the poor people, for only the victims, for only those who don't cheat on their wives, or only those who don't steal, or only those who read their Bible and pray every day. He didn't die only for those who pray the prayer. He died for us all. He died for it all. For the rich, for the perpetrators, for the faithful and faithless spouses, for the honest, for the procrastinators, for the cheaters. It doesn't matter how good and bad we are. It doesn't matter how good or bad our situation. Jesus died for it all. Jesus says in John, when predicting his death, but that by his death, he will draw all of creation to himself through his sacrifice. By coming as a man in human skin, God put his stamp of approval on all of creation. He showed us in the most concrete and open way possible that instead of being a judge on a stone throne far away from us, he was conspiring with us, on our side, completely in with his creation. And then, by dying on the cross, he took everything that might keep us from seeing his collusion, from cooperating with him, anything that might keep us from entering the kingdom. He took it all on himself and he killed it dead so that it could no longer be a barrier between us and his redemption plan. Robert Capon says this: "The judge is shamelessly in cahoots with the guilty world, and he is utterly determined to acquit it no matter what." He didn't do half the job. He finished it. He pronounced a final judgment on sin that day when he died, and that judgment stands through the ages, and it stands this morning. It is finished. There is nothing more to do. And then he rose again, and he pronounced his judgment on creation, and just like in Genesis, he says, "It is good." Back to the Pharisees. Remember how they acted like the keepers of the door? How they made the people run through the mud before they checked their boots? They were all about the rules. They were all about power and control. And the strong word from Jesus is always for these kinds of people. For those who think that they can do it on their own. For the ones who keep the gates, the ones who don't need anything, the ones who think they know the rules. The Pharisees, the rich, the powerful, the ones who have everything taken care of, the in crowd. And so a word for those of us in the in crowd. God has given us, the church, the great privilege of living in the kingdom. And when we judge others, heaping on them requirements in order to gain the kingdom, we miss the whole point. We act like the Pharisees. When we say to each other, first you need to stop sleeping with your boyfriend, stop yelling at your kids, stop stealing from your boss. First, you need to get your life together, sweetie. Wash your face, shine your shoes. We choose the heavy burden. The burden Jesus took on himself that day, the day he died, and said, "No more, it's done." Robert Capon again says, "The church should not act like a sport fisherman. We are not the judges. We don't choose what is good and bad. And when we take on the burden of trying to figure out who is in and who is out, when we try to figure out how people should live in order to be in, we miss the whole point. Because our job is to be part of the work of the dragnet, gathering it all in, not the sport fisherman, choosing the best fish to bring into the boat." Jesus, in contrast to the Pharisees, says to the crowds, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, all you harassed and helpless, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus isn't like the Bible college rule makers. He isn't looking over your shoulder trying to find out your mistakes. He isn't waiting back at the door to give you work duty. In fact, he has the work duty covered so that you can just join the party. You don't have to fix a thing. You don't have to figure it out beforehand. You don't have to wash your face and shine your shoes. You just have to say, Hi, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Anything at all. You're in. You belong. We are in. We belong. Each one of us here this morning, the kingdom is ours. Jesus has pronounced the judgment already. It is finished, and it is good. The only way you can avoid the kingdom is to not trust that the kingdom has come, that the work is finished, and that the party has started. The way of independence, of autonomy. You see, when the angels pull that bursting net onto the beach that last day, there's going to be a big party. And the only way that you will miss it is if, like the biggest party pooper in history, you decide that you are better off going it alone and leave all on your own. And that way is truly hellish. The good news, though, is that God is better than us even at forbearing. He is the God of second chances and third chances and fourth chances, fifth chances, sixth chances. And all this time we've been waiting for the kingdom to come, these 2,000 years, it's God's gracious forbearance, his gracious waiting. The Bible says this, now is the time to listen. This is the day to be helped. Don't put it off. Don't frustrate God's work by showing up late or throwing a question mark over everything that's been done. This parable reminds us that today is the day to lay down our old burdens and pick up new ones. To lay down our burdens of trying to figure out how everything will work out, of trying to get heaven problems fixed in the here and now. To lay down our burden of going it alone. Jesus asks us to lay these down because they're not ours to carry. He asks us to trade burdens with him. And what does his yoke look like? His burden is the kingdom, the work of redemption, the proclamation of the good news that it is finished and it is good. Everything is dealt with. His burden is to share this news, to live it out, to join the party that's going to happen at the end of time right now, today. So this morning, as we have communion, as I invite you to the table, I'm going to ask you to go into that part of yourself where you know God is. And I want you to talk to him about the burden you're carrying that he might be asking you to lay down, and what burden instead he might be asking you to pick up. Maybe he's asking you to lay down the heavy burden of bitterness and pick up the burden of forgiveness. Or to lay down the burden of despair and instead choose the better story. Pick up the burden of hope. To lay down anger and pick up peace. To lay down trying to figure it all out and just pick up acceptance. Or to lay down the burden of control and pick up the burden of forbearance, of patient waiting on God for his time, for his ways. See, even if you chose to go it on your own yesterday, today is still the day. Tomorrow will be the day too. Now is the time to lay down your heavy burden and pick up the lighter one of the kingdom.